Who's ready for example 6? I know I am, so let's get going. Alright, so on these example problems, you guys, we will be finding intervals of increasing and decreasing, and this is pertaining to the x values that make the graph increase or the x values that make the graph decrease. So we will be looking and focusing on only x values when we do this. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about what it means to increase on a graph and decrease. Well, increasing on a graph, if you trace your graph from left to right, increasing is when you head upwards as you trace. So if you see like right here, I'm increasing. Decreasing when you go from left to right on your graph is when you head downhill. So like this right here would be a decrease. Okay, so what we're going to do at the start. Okay, first of all, we're going to focus on something called the turning points. Okay, which the turning points of the graph occur on these little humps in the graph. So kind of like the tops of the mountains or down in the valley. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on our turning points first. So, before we do that, let me grab a nifty tool. Okay, so the turning points on my graph are these right here. We got one there, one there, one there, and one there. Guys, so the first thing we're going to do is draw vertical lines through our turning points. And I'll explain why in just a moment. I promise, I promise. Okay, so here's my first turning point. So I'm going to draw a line down at my first turning point right here. All right, and I have my next turning point right here. Bam. All right, I'm going to draw another line through this turning point on my graph. And I have one more turning point, so I'm going to draw one more vertical line through that bad boy. Bam. Okay, now what we're going to be focusing on at these dashed lines, we only care about where the dashed line hits the x-axis because we want to know intervals of increase and decrease on the x-axis. Okay, so I only care about x values. So looking at my points, I'm only going to be focusing on the x's. So I'm going to emphasize the x values in all my points, which I've given you guys the points of the turning points. Guys, so 4, -1 pertains to this turning point, 2, 1 pertains to this turning point, -1, -3 pertains to this turning point, and -3, 2 applies to this turning point. So we only care about the x values at these different dashed lines. Now, looking at this first zone, so we're going to be looking at different zones. Okay, so since this side doesn't have another dashed line, that means it's going to keep going in this direction for forever. So it's going to be extending in the negative direction for forever. So since this one doesn't have a dashed line, we're just going to call this negative infinity, since there is not a dashed line over there. Okay, but we do have a dashed line here, and where this dashed line crosses the x-axis is at -3. Okay, so I'm going to write that beneath my dashed line right there. Okay, so now my next turning point. We are looking at the x value where it hits the x-axis, which is about at -1. So I'm going to write a -1 down here. All right, at my next turning point, I'm only going to focus on the x, which the x is 2. Okay, it hits the x-axis, my dashed line, at 2. And finally, my last turning point, this dashed line will cross the x-axis at the 4. Alright, and like over here, since this side doesn't have another dashed line, we are headed in the positive infinity direction forever. So to infinity and beyond with Buzz Lightyear. So the upper bound on this graph is positive infinity. Alright, so now the reason why I did this, these are the numbers we're going to be using to determine the intervals of increase and decrease. And since we are stating intervals, we are going to be writing the x intervals in interval notation. Okay, so when we do this, we do interval notation. Alright, now before I can place my numbers in here, first of all, I need to know if this graph is increasing or decreasing on different intervals. So I'm going to look at this first interval right here, which when I trace my pencil from left to right, I am headed in an upward motion. So this right here is an interval of increase. So this is increasing. Okay, which this interval, the lower bound, or the one that's on the left, is negative infinity. So guess what, you guys? I'm going to throw a negative infinity in there. Okay, and the number on the right of this interval, or however far right we can go, or the upper bound, is -3. So I put the left number in the left spot and the right number in the right spot of the coordinate pair. Or I'm sorry, not of the coordinate pair, of your interval notation. Okay, so basically we're looking at the section and then we're writing the number on the left, writing the number on the right. And guys, when we use interval notation for intervals of increase and decrease, this is never really going to equal the value -1 because it's kind of like going uphill and downhill at the same time when it's at the turning points. Okay, it's kind of changing from an increase to a decrease. So we're not going to equal that value. It's not increasing and it equals -3 because at -3 on the x, it's transitioning from an increase to a decrease. Okay, so when we write intervals of increase and decrease, we don't use any parentheses. No parentheses. We don't use any brackets, only parentheses. Sorry, guys, I misspoke. So only parentheses we will be using. Okay, all right, guys, let's look at this next section. So first of all, I need to determine if this is an interval of increase or decrease. Well, when I trace with my hand from left to right, I am headed downhill. So guess what, you guys? It's a decrease. So this bad boy right here is decreasing. So decrease. Okay, so I'm going to be writing my answer in an interval of decrease. So I'm going to put it in the decrease section. So all we do, we write the number on the left, the number on the right, or our lower bound and our upper bound. Okay, remember, we do not equal these, so we only use a parenthesis. So my left-hand number is -3, and my right-hand number is -1. So this graph decreases on the x-axis all the way from -3 to -1. That's when it is decreasing. Okay, my next section, let's figure out, is this an increase or is it a decrease? Well, when I trace it with my finger, I am headed uphill. So guess what? It is an interval of increase. Yay! Okay, and I just throw my numbers on the left and right in that section. Okay, so I have -1 on the left and 2 on the right. Okay, now, when we have more than one intervals, you see here we have this interval, and they are not connected in any way. Whenever we have more than one interval, you guys, we're going to be writing this U symbol in between them, which that means union. It's going to bring our sets together, just like when something forms a union or groups together, okay, we group things together with union. So this big U is grouping this interval to this interval since they have nothing to do with each other, other than the fact that they increase. All right, guys, so let's keep going. So decrease, or let's see what our next section will be, if it's an increase or a decrease. So when I trace my graph with my hand, guess what, you guys? I'm headed downhill, so this is a decrease. Bam. All right, and I write the number on the left first and then the right. So I have, let's see here, try to squeeze it in here. 2 on the left and 4 on the right. And since I have more than one interval now, I'm going to throw my union symbol in between. Bring them together since they're besties. All right, so we have just one more section. Okay, so I need to first of all figure out if it's an increase or if it's a decrease. Holy hot dog, you guys are so smart. You're correct. It was an increase. So I'll be writing my answer in the increase section. So I know I'm going to be adding on another interval, you guys. So I'm going to add on this lovely union symbol to bring the third interval together with the other two. All right, guys, and I just plop in the numbers on the left and on the right. So I'm going to put in 4 on the left-hand side of my interval and positive infinity on the right-hand side. All right, guys, and these are all the intervals of increase and decrease for this graph. Cool, right? Okay, now, example 7 is pretty much the same as this. So if you feel like you have a good handle on this problem, I highly recommend trying example 7 on your own and fast forwarding to the end to see if you get it correct. Okay, you guys, so the first thing we do, okay, we're going to be identifying the turning points on the graph, which that is when the graph changes directions. Okay, so the graph changes directions at this point, and this point. Okay, and these are just kind of like the little humps on the graph. So either at the top of the mountain or in the valleys. Those are our turning points. Okay, and the next thing we did, you guys, is we drew in our vertical lines to see where they're going to cross the x-axis. So this is my first turning point, so I'm going to draw my first vertical line. Bam, bam, bam. All right, this is my second turning point, so I'm going to draw my next vertical line. All right, and finally, this is my last turning point, so I'm going to draw in another vertical line, like so. Bam, 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 bam. Okay, now, after we draw in our vertical lines, we want to know the x points on the different turning points. So that way we can set up our intervals on the x-axis. So when we do this, you guys, I'm only going to be focusing on the x values of the turning points. Okay, and remember we're going to write our x values down here. So where these vertical lines are crossing the x-axis. Okay, now in my first section, okay, this one does not have a vertical dashed line on this side. Okay, so this section right here is headed off to negative infinity for forever. So I'm just going to write negative infinity on this side. Now this one, it crosses the x-axis at negative 1, which is the same as that right there. So I'm going to write negative 1 here. Okay, my next one, it crosses the x-axis at positive 1, which is the same as my x value. Yay! Alright, this one will cross the x-axis at 3, which is the x value of my coordinate for that turning point. So 3. And then finally, guys, this section doesn't have another dashed line. So it is headed in the positive infinity direction for forever. So it doesn't really have an upper bound. So we're just going to call it positive infinity. Alright, so the next step, we need to first of all know if the different sections of the graph are increasing or decreasing. And once we find that, we just put these numbers into our intervals, and then we're done. Alright, so this first one, if I trace them left to right, you are correct. This is an interval of decrease. Holy hot dog. Okay, which I'm just going to label it with a D. Okay, so this is an interval of decrease. Okay, and you just pick the two numbers. So I'm going to pick the number on the dashed line and the number before it. So this goes from negative infinity to negative 1. Alright, my next section, from here to here. So if I trace, holy hot dog, I'm going uphill. So this is going to be an interval of increase. Okay, and I just write the numbers on the two dashed lines in that section. So negative 1 and 1. Alrighty, now my next section, if I trace it, I'm going downhill. So you guys are correct. That was an interval of decrease. Okay, and the numbers that are in this section at the bottom here are 1 and 3. So I'm just going to throw those bad boys in a parenthesis. So it goes from 1 to 3 on the x-axis. And now, since I have more than one parenthesis, you guys, I have to join them together with a union. So I'm joining my intervals together. Okay, and lastly, you guys, from here all the way up to there, we are steadily increasing because we are headed upward from left to right. So this will be an interval of increase. So since I have more than one interval, you guys, I'm going to put my union. Okay, the first number in that section is a 3. And since this didn't have an upper bound, it's headed out to positive infinity. And there we go, you guys. That would be our intervals. Those would be our intervals of increase and decrease. I had so much fun, you guys. Thank you.